The 2026 International Colloquium Series Europe is sponsored by the Episcopal Diocese of California, the Tabernacle Community Development Corporation, the Waters Living Trust, and Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. With university sponsors, Pepperdine University, the University of Geneva, the Graduate Theological Union, the Catholic University of Leuven, and the Catholic University of Lyon. And community partners, the Cathedral Church of the Holy Trinity, the American Cathedral in Paris, the Chemin Neuf Community in France, Emmanuel Episcopal Church of Geneva, the Center for Liberation Theologies at the Catholic University of Leuven, and the French-speaking Institute of Systematic Theology and Ethics at the University of Geneva. With the 2026 hotel partner, Nest M Gallery, Paris La Défense, an Accor luxury hotel. And special thanks to the following: Dr. Christophe Chalamet, Dr. Estelle Sogbu, Dr. Judith Gruber, Dr. Dara Straub, Kim Powell, Dr. Anne-Marie Reinen, Dr. Raymond Carr, Dr. Valerie Miles-Tribble, and Colette Rogers Grizzell.
The Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation is dedicated to promoting justice, health, education, and service. Please consider making a donation at NorcalMLKFoundation.org. Every donation makes a difference.
She has published, among other things, I'll mention this monograph, which came out in 2020, titled Change Agent Church in Black Lives Matter Times, Urgency for Action, 2020. And she's here with her son, Miles, who is there doing the audio and taking care of the technology, and we're grateful for his presence also. So your talk, dear Valerie, is titled Why Theological Reflection on Jazz Matters. And so we are all ears. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate you mentioning my son. He came along to enjoy Europe and to get a better understanding of what we do, because he has met us in more informal ways. And so I just want to thank him publicly for his in technology by his profession, but for encountering different spaces, places, systems, and trying to help us non-technology centered scholars survive as we move around throughout Europe. So Miles, thank you very much wherever you are. All right. I want to address the thought of why theological reflection on jazz matters. I came, though, with a title that I added to that or had prior to that. And the title is Jazz and Womanist Expression, why theological reflection on jazz matters. And I don't have a PowerPoint. I want to just have us think about jazz and theology. And I want to thank Dr. Ray Carr for setting up with this seg about Thelonious Monk. One of the things that I realize is that many creatives walk down any street in virtually any place, and they're drawn to the wafting notes of jazz like a moth to light. That's my experience. I've been enjoying jazz throughout Paris. I'm looking forward to jazz in Italy. And it is one of those things that as a child I was baptized into the spirituality of jazz by my dad, an ardent collector and one whom I call an apostle of jazz. And as I learned about the genre and its prophetic proclaimers, I grew to appreciate the conjuring of subversive creativity as an act of resistant justice. A musical theology persists in the timeless expression of ragtime, blues, bebop, and yes, gospel music that interweave diverse threads into a tapestry of hope. Like prayers, the subversive creativity of jazz infuses sensory notes played through the artist's experiential complexities of knowing and trusting that the articulation finds grace. My appreciation of jazz as a significant art form grew in trusting and appreciating the constant jazz throughout our household and just coming to understand my dad's love for the music as an avid collector from age 14, who urged me to develop an ear for the beauty of this sound, this instrumental voicing, this embodiment of the collective. And so I discovered also at age 14 the creative lure of quilted patterns in the syncopation and the dissonant tensions in melody and message. Perhaps what seems at first to be disconnected clatter transforms from noise into vibrant notes and rhythms that conjure a primordial awakening to soul freedom. Perhaps this bone-deep freedom is what the earliest 20th century art form provided to marginalize African Americans for expressive release from racism amid the urban and rural segregation of Jim Crow oppression across America. Perhaps improvisation, the skillful yet unstructured elements of jazz called improv, is what inspired subversive modes of voicing to soar beyond the limits of earthly survival under societal conditions of structural racism, even for my father, born 1912, having to survive the Great Depression, coming of age in that time, a blue-collar worker, a Black man caring for his blind single mother, and with limited access for his own creative expression. Now, as a theological educator, writer, and pastor, I often meditate with jazz pulsing in the background. You come in my house, jazz is playing. I'm working on a sermon, jazz is playing. I'm writing another book about jazz and womanist expression, and jazz is playing. So bathed in the notes and the rhythms, a stream of consciousness opens avenues of creativity. And when confronted by writer's block, I turn up the volume and listen. Focus for inspiration. I envision a jazz set of artists in the backdrop of my own deliberations, and I liken the setting to a sacred space of people gathered to engage one another, whether in class or public communal circle or in worship. After all, dialogue is improvisation. Whether vocalized in words or lyrics sung or played, imagine each voice as an instrument contributing notes of memory shared from lived experiences. Creative engagement offers compositions of perspectives through which we learn if we listen and ponder what we're hearing. And in the exchange, a process of meaning making deepens for mutual appreciation for the holy emanations of subversive creativity. Now, the term subversive has a negative connotation for some, yet I use it to signify an affirmational counterpoint to negative obstacles that threaten to undermine justice of personal and communal well-being for thriving. I would argue that subversive creativity threads the messaging of jazz as music and as testimonial memory of our shared humanity. So live realities, sow the seeds of creativity as contextual underpinnings that contribute to a theology of being. which values human dignity as innately divine. And in my book in progress, Jazz and Womanist Expression, Conjuring Subversive Creativity, I'm deeply committed to share a constructive theology of being that's not limited to specific faiths or religious traditions. At its core, a theology of being is a shared belief in the inherent goodness of creation, in which divine balance of dignity, ancestral continuation, and mutual dependency bear witness to communal discernment and our emotive need for love and belonging. So I think in this talk, you're hearing things that Aaron said, you're hearing things that Ray said, and I believe that this emotive need for love and belonging, the latter, our emotive need to love and belong, is part of the divine essence breathed into each person birthed in this earthly existence, to join the collective of humanity. Hence, a theology of being is radically conscious of the essential holy oil of soul freedom that lubricates creatively subversive expressions. There's a friend and Chicago pastor, Otis Moss III, who wrote on the blues. He describes the blues as faithful lament about power, place, position. Yet it holds a vision of democracy, infusing love and jazz as its deliverer, end quote. So historically, jazz is this genre rooted in the Black lived experience where music, derived from African rhythmic memory, gave voice to soulful sounds of living on the margins. Jazz as a music art form syncretized creative expression that stretched the respectability of operatic classic compositions or the traditional hymnody of Western European sensibilities. Many of the classic jazz masters live lives at the subversive fringes, marked by challenges that informed and reverberated through their sound, through their styling, and gave impetus to express a creative soul freedom of improvisation as life-sustaining release. It's crazy out here. Instead of getting angry, how do I survive through my music? What am I going to play? How do I, in this group, look at you and you know, take the note and go with it? And then you look at somebody else, take the note and go with it. Now we're living. Now we're grooving. Now we're vibing. Now we're surviving. Historically, many of the jazz masters had challenges to overcome, whether addictions, whether living on somebody's couch, whether trying to figure out where the next paycheck was going to come from. So some of that sadness, some of that challenge came through the music, but with that was this insistence that I'm going to survive somehow. So sometimes that expression transcends into the sensory complexity of John Coltrane's Ascension. If you've ever listened to that in part 1 and 2, that is freeform notes, right? Mm-hmm. It crescendos to this assault on the senses and on the ear like a din of a city's rush hour. Also, if you listen to Pharoah Sanders, you hear that din that makes you think about creation and what it must have sounded like going from silence to every bird singing, to every tree rustling, to the wind moving, to the oceans roaring. Take Mary Lou Williams' Praise the Lord, or Monk's Blessed Assurance, and then hear Duke Ellington's subversive ode to soul freedom in the mellow Come Sunday Suite. On his 1943 album, Black, Brown, and Beige, vocalized in 1958 with Mahalia Jackson's rich gospelizing. Lord, dear Lord of love, God Almighty, God of love, please look down. and see my people through. I believe the sun and moon will shine up in the sky. And when the day is gray, I know it's clouds just passing by. He'll give peace and comfort to every troubled mind. Come Sunday, oh, come Sunday, that's the day. Often we'll feel weary, but he knows our every care. Go to him in secret. He'll hear your every prayer. Lilies of the valley, they neither toil nor spin, and flowers bloom and springtime birds sing. Up from dawn till sunset, man work hard all day. Come Sunday, oh, come Sunday, that's the day. You see, if we believe that theology is faith-seeking understanding through revelatory insight and spiritual awakening, then jazz emotes an irresistible, soul-stirring spirituality with chords of harmony and dissonance, from narratives of distinct life stories and ministry journeys that link people together. A breakthrough comes, hopefully, when soulful notes are heard as revelatory, insightful, and spiritually awakening to manifest joy with the eruption of knowing. When the artist whines on the sax, wails on the trumpet, talks on the bass, or pounds percussive beats, creative conjuring breaks the chains of ancestral bondage with each note of newfound freedom. Jazz improvisation with its spontaneity requires more than ears. It seeks the sensory of the soul. It is a spiritual, in the moment, outpouring of artistic praise. The beauty of the jazz genre is when a particular cadre of artists gather to interpret and instinctively create anew. The context of a gathering, or a set, if you will, weaves innate gifts and learned skills cultivated into a shared liturgy of imagination. Like the modal improv of Miles's Kind of Blue. In one take, they never rehearsed it. They went into the studio, they knew each other, they trusted each other, they talked about themes, and then they played. Kind of Blue. Just like heart prayers don't need rehearsal. Jazz improv captures the essence of mood music that, unless taped, might become a one-of-a-kind experience. Still, the spontaneity of creativity is subversive at its best when exhorted like a prophetic call to undo the bonds of conformity. The spirit power of jazz music as expression, as soul freedom, sets in motion a sacred flow between musicians and audience, a cacophony of dissonant and harmonious sounds that inspires those cheers and those whistles with hand claps and foot taps, as well as loud amens. The artists and the listeners are baptized by a cleansing immersion that releases the spirit to heal sensory tensions with the ebb and crescendo, transforming into deep meditation. Now, in my book, I'm using this sense of jazz, this theology of being, and I'm associating how we teach, how we preach, how we live, and how we engage. I'm associating it to a jazz set, where a leader is musician, composer, or pastor, priest, or professor, educator, facilitates a choreography of the collective. In other words, we don't walk into class thinking we know everything. We don't walk into the group thinking we're playing the only note. The gathering becomes a conjuring space of openness to engage learning together through improvisational exchanges where the high and the low notes of our lived experiences interweave with the music of each contribution. Each person, as God's created, has creative capacity because each brings to the collective an inherent composition of contextual realities. And this is what Aaron was speaking to when he was talking about coming through this chattel slavery experience, having ancestors that went through that. We bring all of that with us in our worldview and how we look at the world. And that's part of the music of our contributions. So each person is God's created, has the creative capacity, because each of us bring into the collective an inherent composition of contextual realities. Hope, envision values, inform our creative sensibilities, while meditation provides the bass note heartstrings of syncopated breathing. That's why jazz can become universal. We can all sing that music. We can all appreciate and understand ourselves as instruments. And we can interweave into this beautiful way of knowing. Thus, our aha moments are the breakout chords of discovery. In short, the Imago Dei. We all are part of this illustrious diversity known as the Imago Dei. So as we conjure improvisational dissonance, I invite us to all be mindful of who's at the margins. In my book, I'm suggesting ways that subversive creativity of jazz can inform our pedagogical approaches, inviting both the teacher to become the learner, inviting the learners to become the teachers, to appreciate that each embodies sensory notes played through the experiential complexities of knowing. We all come with something. And so those epistemological complexities of knowing actually enhance the experience rather than interfere with the organic flow of mutual learning. And as each participant adds a sense of artistic inquiry in those questions or a perspective from their background, an organic relational quest for sensory freedom infuses the gathering. Still, we got to be honest. And this is why I appreciate our being able to travel through Europe and share our experiences and hear yours. We have to be honest that theological education is confronted by divisive approaches at a time of volatile disunity in the public sphere that threatens the diversity of voices as well as the freedom of learning. So my joy comes when I'm immersed with young people positing their worldviews, which challenge even my aha discovery of how distinct and yet similar their views are to mine when I came of age. If we don't appreciate what they are hearing, what they are seeing, what they are voicing, then we are missing out on this theology of being, and we are missing out on learning. These personal encounters, like jazz sets, inspire collaborative projects, fellowship gatherings, restorative justice circles, podcasts, documenting our work and our growth together. We must move from rote models of normativity that marginalize those deemed to be non-conforming as educators and students. Globally, this includes all of us, y'all. Our seminaries and theological institutions tend to wrap up in the warm cloak of theologizing religious tenets by loosely using the word love to safely stay out of the fray of disparity or disunity. Diversity, as in institutional diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI goals, is approached in safe, generalized ways. Yes, it's being attacked in America and it's being twisted in different ways, but still, how do we critically reflect upon theological training and whether it can remain relevant? if education takes place in the hush vacuum of academic hallowed halls. We cannot afford to remain ensconced in the pristine order of dogma. Can we dare to be bold enough to wade into the ugliness of the human divide in the cracks, according to Monk, in search of new meaning for public justice witness? Have we forgotten Jesus's parables, his intentional encounters, his lessons and experiences as an enemy of the state and an enemy of the entrenched interests? Luke 4:18-19 proclaim his prophetic inspirations of Isaiah and likely drew from Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And yet, as we glean the gospel conditions in which Jesus ministered, we're witnessing subversive ministry at its most creative. Public, breathing new life into a challenging status quo, while affirming sight for the blind and release for the captives and the outcasts. And so as I close, I just want to say that I embody the discipline of womanist theological and ethical approaches with over 40 years of interdisciplinary scholarship in that particular area of liberation theology that was first dismissed in the Guild and the Academy as mere essays and stories, just Black women talking, they would say. Black scholars, and particularly self-identified womanist scholars, have been marginalized in the Academy. And it is still necessary to forge subversive pathways or modalities when research and writing are not deemed to be academic enough. Perhaps the rules of the Academy still prioritize lenses authenticated in authoritarian dogmatics of Socratic arguments by Western Eurocentric male theorists. But still, life shows us that the underside will not be silenced. It's not possible, excuse me, it's not possible to offer a pristine theology. It's not possible to offer a pristine theology of abundance amid the laboratory for public theology with the marginalizing social disparities, hopelessness, excuse me, traveling and the changes of weather. I'm sorry, let me start that little part again, and then I will close. It's not possible to offer, thank you, honey. It's not possible to offer a pristine theology of abundance amid the laboratory that we live in, amid the laboratory for public theology, with marginalizing social disparities, hopelessness, and inhumanity confronting us daily. We've got to step outside. We've got to see where the pain is. And some of us may be able to create a new song that will address those issues and encourage those very voices to join in and add to the song. Our theology and our pedagogy must wrestle with the disparity realities of global ministry. So admittedly, prophetic justice work can be draining and downright deflating unless we take the time, make the time for prayer, find the time for music and for laughter, even at ourselves. A theology of jazz is a theology of being, open to new perspectives in sensory learning to make music together. Jazz invites open worship, public gatherings, classes with meditative music, sounds, spoken word, visual and audiovisual arts interspersed. That's the way I open my classes. And I'm so grateful this evening that we will have Jazz Vespers for inspiration and for meaning making. So as I close, I want to leave you with this thought about creating spaces for learning and improvising new freedom chords. There's an urgency to shed the restrictions on revelation. The Spirit, ever holy, moves in justice voices who passionately challenge the just us silos of ecclesial theology. In short, a lived theology must open doors and break unjust barriers in order to mend division. And yes, like jazz, faith is cathartic. It's open to soul freedom and free form expression, to release traumatic oppressions by affirming critical truths that debunk injustice. And yes, when theology opens to truly see the needs of marginalized communities, we find that bone-deep faith relies upon subversive modes to survive. And yes, like theology, the complexity of jazz dissonance, the soulful notes with harmonic riffs stretch us even while inviting us to go deeper. And yes, jazz is a lived theology, conjuring the sensory oneness of words, sounds, and rhythms of God's artistry in creation to stimulate spiritual energy. We are reminded to be courageous enough to step forward toward the new horizons where God already awaits. Thank you.
We have some time now to engage both Raymond and Valerie. I heard two very beautiful interventions, and opening a lot of possibilities for theology today and tomorrow. So a lot to ponder, a lot to discuss. Who would like to Saida, please.
I will always Thank you very much. I really love both of the contributions. To Raymond, I've got like you mentioned sporadically the name of Bart, but I know your book is in Carr, Bart, and Cohen. So my question is, you yourself said that Monk does not want to be categorized, or you do not want to use categorizations either, but the danger of using a European thinker, which is like one of the giants of the field, as a lens to interpret Monk. I know you use also Cohen, but it is like translating an African American artist's production into categories which are alien to him, and that I could see in your talk. For example, the very last sentence where you said, amongst art helps us or brings order to the disorder, which is order is associated with system building and hierarchy and always is contrasted with chaos, which is for me like improvisation is a spontaneous and is disorder. So it is against order, which is very hierarchical. It's linked with hierarchy and domination, etc. So order is not a value necessarily. So to say that he's trying to put order, to make order out of disorder is really against what he's doing, because his music is disorder. And disorder is life.
Is that a question?
It is a question. No, I'm saying like you're putting a category into his music which is not his. Maybe because you were reading his music through a European thinker's, maybe.
You want me to respond to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Monk practices improvisations. When you listen to his music, you hear him practicing. He developed that whole style. So we have to be very careful when we talk about jazz that we don't make it into like he talks about the lot. Some people talk about, hey, Monk, play some of your weird notes. Or they're very logical notes for him. And so I think when we use language of order from a certain point of departure or a certain epistemology, and then we read that into theology, even someone like a Karl Barth. Karl Barth, one of his famous statements was that systematization is a danger to theology. But at the same time, he's writing a dogmatics. Yeah, and so even postmodernism, right? Someone like David Tracy would say there's not a postmodernism, because to call it postmodernism is to give it a construct. There's postmodernisms. right? So we have to be careful when we like we'll say sovereignty, and then we assume that's the same thing that's going on in the Bible, and they mean the same. And I think listening to someone like a monk helps us to kind of critique that. The idea that we think by critiquing order, we're pushing toward disorder. And we forget the dialectic that is actually a part of that. And I resist it. And I think Monk's music is the opposite of that. And that's why Monk is sometimes criticized by free jazz artists, because he improvised on the melody. Now watch this, but the melody had all kind of possibilities. You didn't know where it was coming from. That's the mystery of it. That's the beauty of it. I wrote an article called Murden and Bart, because I flipped them. I was talking to Catholics. And in this space, I'm talking to Europeans, so I thought I'd do a little bit more European stuff. But I had some things that I skipped on Cone that I could have easily talked about. But the piece on Murden and Carl Barth was called Murden and Bart in Dialogue on Faith and Understanding, a hermeneutics of freedom and ambiguity. Those two things go together. And we have to get to a place where we're okay with the ambiguity. And that's why I also had the picture of the two at an angle, because I'm at the same time giving you structure and critiquing structure. That's the dialectic.
Please.
So, thank you also, Valerie. Your definition of theology is faith-seeking understanding, and then you define jazz, and also you use like organism, organic, unity, spontaneity. So, and then you define jazz as theology of being, which I would say the theology of being for me is a theology of system building. So I would call it a theology of becoming. So jazz is for me a theology of becoming. And one question, maybe to both of you, but what I'm struggling with from the beginning is that from the first talk, jazz is the music, was originally the music of oppressed people, a voice of protest and resistance, etc. But today, and you proudly said now we see people doing jazz in Italy, in Sweden, all around the world. So it is like, for me, cultural appropriation and commodification of a music which is supposed to be protest. And we see now in elite conservatoires, people learn jazz and play jazz, and they get, so usually white people get recognition and awards, etc. Whereas at the same time, black people are being marginalized and stigmatized and have no voices. So it's like I'm seeing a kind of tension there of being proud that the music is now universal, but at the same time, it is like it is originally, it was not the purpose. It's no longer the voice of the oppressed. The oppressed are still oppressed, and it's appropriated for other purposes. It's commodified.
So you've said a whole lot there. Let me just touch on a couple of things. One, I think this is what I'm speaking of, about appreciating each voice and each context of our human existence when we come together as part of a melody. So it is perfectly fine and understandable if you, from your context, approach jazz as a theology of becoming. It also is perfectly fine with me in my context, having lived with jazz so long, that it affirms a theology of being. So it can be both. It's not one way's wrong, or I'm incorrect or you're incorrect, but it is where we are coming into an interaction, an understanding, a personalization with jazz and its meaning. Okay, so from our having understood the roots of jazz, emanating out of some of these other music art forms, as it continues to progress in the continuum, and younger generations are developing their forms and voices in jazz. There's not a stagnation there. Now, the appropriation comes in. When I hear, we were talking about this the other day, this elevator type music, where they take the jazz medium and turn it into something that you can barely recognize. There's no opportunity to even help the listener understand where this came from. Whereas live jazz, as Christophe and Uven are playing, they're first saying this is a Coltrane piece. This is a Miles Davis piece. This is a Monk piece. They are at least acknowledging the creative roots of where it came from. So when we gather together in a conversation, it is important not to say, well, you may not be speaking systematically enough. It's important for you to understand from what place the person is speaking. That might be, they might be speaking from a theopraxis. They might be speaking from a theoethical standpoint. They might be speaking from a place of lament right then. And whether or not it's systematic enough to you is not the case. What are you getting from what you're hearing? What are they trying to convey? So with my esteemed professorial colleagues, we're always in debate because, yes, systematics have become and are venerated as the building blocks of understanding that we take as a point of learning and teaching. But how do you embody those systematics? How do you practice it? How do you engage it? You see, we can't marginalize other aspects of theological approaches in favor of systematics. Systematics can just be thought on a page unless we figure out how to live it. So that's what we're trying to talk about in terms of music.
If I may say one other thing in relationship, the first thing you learn about systematic theology, at least the way I was taught, is that it's not systematic. Right? That's just the language we use to talk about what we're doing. And it can provide a structure, but the structure is not to be hegemonic. And in the African American tradition, I think Zora Neale Hurston is correct when she says that the brilliance of what we do is in the recombination of things. And so to tell a Black person that they can't use these other sources is almost like removing food off their table. And this is one of the things you learn from Amiri Baraka in Blues, the wonderful book called Blues People. He said, jazz artists, blues artists played on European instruments. So they're taking that instrument and now they're making meaning out of it in a new way. So again, that tends to offset, because we have to use language to speak. Charles Long, again, one of his great points was, he said that a theology of freedom is first a critique of theology as a powerful mode of discourse. And so even as he criticizes, raised the question of the possibility of theology, because he's raised the question of the possibility of it, he's not saying get rid of it, he's saying that don't allow it to overdetermine you. Because if you do that, if you push it away, now you might have removed a source that you can use your own brilliance to change in some way. I had last point I'll make on this. I had one of my professors told me, he was like, I was writing a piece on Thomas Merton, and I think it was somebody in William Stringfellow. And he said, well, why don't you do Du Bois and Stringfellow? I said, I want to do this person's Stringfellow. You know why he wanted me to do Du Bois? Because Du Bois was Black. But he didn't acknowledge that I'm a Black guy doing this stuff. You see? And that's what happens. So you get pushed into a bag that's somebody else's bag. And I refuse to just buy into those kind of categories. I think they are shallow, personally. That's just my take on it.
Just real quick, one other beauty of improv. If you're listening, and my son and I go almost every Sunday, it's my self-care time after teaching all week and preaching that morning. And we go to a place where we're members right on the Pacific Ocean. And they play live jazz. Ume, you come over there. We'll make sure you get in there to perform for us. It's a magical place. The thing is, the part of improv that I notice as the different artists are playing or having their time, or even if they're all sometimes getting into a feel of free form, they don't lose eye contact. They're communicating. They are understanding that they're a collective. And sometimes in those riffs, you'll hear Bach, you'll hear Mozart, you'll hear something that then they go right back into something else that they have. So in this beautiful art form of music, of jazz, we're acknowledging and appreciating all the forms. Why can't we do that in theology? Why can't we do that in living? Why can't we build community that way? It's the surprises and the joy of saying, aha. That's why sometimes if you're looking at a jazz set, all of a sudden somebody breaks out laughing as they're listening to their brother or their sister do the improv. They just start laughing. Yeah, Sullivan Fortner was just having a good time on the piano last weekend. And he was like, as he was, because something is happening in you
Yeah.
that is taking you beyond the A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3 kind of modality. And when you get there, it's this spiritual release. And you either laugh or you scream or you hit something hard. You know, you see this in jazz when they're really grooving together. And I would say, even if it's a soloist, they find their place and their mood. And by the way, saxophone's my absolute favorite jazz instrument. So, thank you all.
Thank you. One last question, maybe Erica. Erica Stalkup is a minister, a Methodist minister in Lausanne.
Oh, wonderful.
And you have a question or a comment, Erica?
Thanks. I hesitate to, please, I can't see. I hesitate to ask it, and I was waiting to ask it, but I didn't know which presentation it fit in best with. I think now's a good time. I'm really interested in the characteristic ways in which jazz can create beloved community. And a lot of it has already been said, but I'm thinking especially in terms of relational theology and how we regard one another. And how we answer that depends on whether we're speaking as a musician, a liturgical scholar, a historian, an anthropologist, whatever. But some of the main themes that I'm hearing today throughout all the presentations are subversiveness, signifying, so that me saying you save me, collective participation, and this idea that the audience is already within, so kind of being through belonging. How hope fits into that, so coming from a perspective of hope, but also doing hope as a way of leading to greater hope, and then also this idea of freedom to improvise, but that is grounded in something. Are there things that you would particularly want to add? List?
I really like what you said about, because I think what I'm calling a theology of being is a recognition of also needing that relationality in how we work together. And hopefully, you know, I teach in very diverse classes where the international student body and multicultural student body come from a place where some have been taught to sit very quietly. And if you don't incorporate this jazz mode into your class, they'd get ignored, because others over here are just really playing their notes and making sure you hear everything. So part of the beauty of being a facilitator, not even a conductor, because a conductor in a opera classic sense, he's going to one section and then the next section, and everybody's watching him. No, as a facilitator on a jazz set, you're catching eyes, you're catching body language, you're catching moods, you're feeling what's happening in the room. And it's okay if you don't get through your exact syllabus for that day. You know, it's okay if the way the worship went or something struck your spirit and the way you preach that day wasn't what you came in with in your notes. That's part of the improvisation and the work of the Spirit.
And I'd like to say, when you study Thelonious Monk's music, you find out that when he was dancing, he was actually conducting. So the other players had to learn to hear with their ears and see with their eyes. Right? So again, when you're watching Monk, he's doing this, and they realize just set the beat to that. And so, he's telling me to do that. And that's part of the brilliance, I think, of what he was doing. And there's something else tied to this that I'd add to today's talk. In my third volume, I address what's called the academic industrial complex and the way that the academy is shaped by certain powers and ideas. I'm very suspicious of those ideas. One of the ideas that you'll find in the academy is the whole need of whether we need theology or not. I'm very suspicious of that. When the Death of God movement emerged, it emerged at the time James Cone is beginning to write Black theology. So anytime I hear ideas that become critical of what we're doing in a way that wants to get rid of those things, I look around to see what we're doing. And something else tied to the academic industrial complex. I just finished being president. I just finished my president. I'm the immediate past president of the Society for the Study of Black Religion. And it's a part of the academic industrial complex. So the point is that you're not trying to get rid of the complex, you're trying to find meaning within the complex. And how do you redeem it? How do you critique these things so you can have a category and at the same time be critical of the category? So Monk practices jazz quite brilliantly.
It just hit me, one other thing. Hope, joy, but allow room for the lament. The lament is part of the music of life. And so if you're in a classroom and you're going at a pace and you have this idea of what you want to accomplish, but someone walks in having had an experience, then the rhythm, the mood, the movement might have to shift. And that's okay, because you're still making music.
You would like to ask a question, Uwe?
Just wanted to add from jazz. So I've been part of different places. It's definitely a lament, and I could see that there's some space for it. For example, at least in European context, by lighting candles, people move around, have prayer time, and interacting with the music in a certain way. And it's a very powerful experience it provides when you see people just taking the time to pray. And I'm speaking about high liturgical settings, and it's interesting that it comes in there. So that's one aspect, and the other one is imperfection. Embrace imperfection as a grace of human quality.
Yes.
That's typical in jazz, and it's also great in jazz service if something is kind of, not falling to the middle part.
And there'll be plenty of that during the Jazz Vespers at 7
yeah.
Kaylin? And that could be the last question before we take a quick break.
Okay. Thank you all both for sharing. And there's so much about which to think. I had two queries, but I'll just pose the one regarding the High Priest of Bop. Considering what you recounted about Monk not being terribly overtly religious, what do you make of his rendition of Blessed Assurance? And more saliently, how do you reconcile your interpretations, theological, of his music alongside who he was and who he perhaps proclaimed himself to be? And the addendum to that would be, what did Monk have to say vis-a-vis his own spirituality?
Well, what Monk had to say about it, we going into his background, because I think sometimes you can say something about something without saying it, right? So that's another conversation. But I think Monk is doing jazz. And I think we have to start seeing the spiritual in the ordinary. And when you hear Monk, like the dissonance or the rhythmic displacement, that itself is a commentary on life. So when I hear his Blessed Assurance, I mean, it's brilliant. Because you hear the silences, and often we don't hear the silences in between my words. I mean, silence is in the room. And so when you hear Monk's Blessed Assurance, and by the way, he titles it, This Is My Story, This Is My Song, right? Even his son says, when you hear Monk play Happy Birthday, you ain't heard those voicings before, right? And so I do think that there's a commentary that he brings to it, and I chose him because it's not religious, right? And I want to acknowledge, and so I made that quick statement that faith is really not about being religious, but being radically human. But being radically human includes the religious things we do properly situated. The problem, I think, is we don't have it properly situated. So now I approach you out of a religious demeanor or some other framework than approaching you as a human being. That's why partly I like Monk. Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break, 10 minutes. 5 p.m. We'll see if Uwe is ready to play some more right before his presentation. We'll see. It doesn't matter. I mean, but let's thank again our two speakers.
The International Colloquium Series confronting global issues with moral clarity and intellectual depth.